I'm Frank Gaffney with the Center for Security Policy. I'm its president, and I'm very proud to be able to say that we are the sponsors of an important new initiative. It is going to be, I think, popularly known as Team B2, which is a reference to an earlier Team B that was conducted in 1976, one of the most important turning points, really, of the Cold War, when a group of outside experts with a distinctly different point of view than that of Team A, the official U.S. government view, were asked to come into, in this case, the CIA by then Director George Herbert Walker Bush, to evaluate the intelligence, to look at the assumptions, and to assess the validity of the resulting national intelligence estimates concerning what was at that time the U.S. government's official position that we should embrace Soviet communism, or at least engage in détente with it, accommodate it, and otherwise hope that by so doing they wouldn't be so beastly to us. Team B1, if you will, took, on the basis of that access to very, very sensitive information, a starkly divergent view, concluding that in fact Soviet communism was a mortal peril to the United States, a totalitarian ideology that was unmistakably determined to destroy us. Out of that, among other things, came, I believe, President Reagan, who believed much of that, but had, as a result of this information, a very firm, authoritative foundation for his assault on then the Ford administration and subsequently the Carter administration with respect to the idea of détente. He subsequently, of course, went on to become president and acted on that set of findings, that strategy, if you will, and ultimately succeeded in destroying the Soviet Union. Flash forward to today. We face once again a totalitarian ideology that is unmistakably bent on our destruction. We are facing a Team A view that the best way to deal with that is to engage it. Détente hasn't quite resurfaced, but engagement is certainly much the term of the day. And we have pulled together, not on the invitation of the CIA in this instance, but a superb team, Team B, to provide that second opinion with respect to today's totalitarian ideology, its ambitions, its capabilities, the progress it's making towards achieving its stated goal of replacing this country, this constitution, this government with Shariah. And we have produced a document which we call Shariah, the Threat to America, as an authoritative second opinion, an assessment of what's wrong with the Team A view, and an assessment that there are important steps that need to be taken to correct the vulnerabilities associated with the present policy. And we're very proud to have the opportunity today to present this report to two of the leading members of the United States House of Representatives, who will, we hope, ensure that it receive the widest possible attention here in the Congress, and with your help, particularly those in the media, that it in turn is made available to the American people as freely as possible. As of now, it is available in a PDF downloadable form at shariahthethreat.com. We encourage you to take a look at it, and with that, I will welcome to the podium our host here in the United States Congress, Congressman Trent Franks of Arizona, a leading member of the House Armed Services Committee, and I think indisputably one of the true authorities up here on Capitol Hill on matters of national security in general, and a great friend. Thank you, Congressman Franks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank all of you for being here today, and I just would say a word about my friend Frank Gaffney. You know, We all understand in this body that the most important duty that we have is to protect and defend this United States, and yet I sometimes wonder if we underestimate and underemphasize the significance played by people like Frank Gaffney and the Center for Security Policy, that they are the citizens that are eternally vigilant for all of us. And I want you to know I truly appreciate you, sir, and I appreciate the good work that you do on so many fronts. I have to start today, if I could, by reading a letter from another colleague. Michelle Bachmann would like to have been here. There are some complex scheduling issues in this place, but she would very much have liked to have been here, but I want to read that letter if I could before I make any comments of my own. But she says, "Dear Frank Gaffney and the Center for Security Policy, today the Team B2 authors and contributors are to be commended upon the release of their systematic and thorough piece of research, which will highly add to the discussion of Sharia law's impact on the United States. Countless hours were devoted to this project by its authors and contributors. Special thanks to former Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Lieutenant General Harry Ed Soyster." He was somewhere. Oh, I'm sorry. He was flying under radar on me. "And Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, United States Army, for pooling their military experience together with the former Director of Central Intelligence, James Woolsey, and Andrew McCarthy, former federal prosecutor and expert in this field. Additional thanks to my colleagues, including Congressman Trent Franks — I can't imagine she would leave that name out — and Congressman Pete Hoekstra, who have taken an interest in this pressing topic. It is our responsibility in Congress to understand the issues as we work on international levels with countries that practice Sharia law, and as we examine the historical influence of Sharia law on jihadists looking to harm our own state. When considering the alternatives, we know we are blessed to live in this great nation under a constitutional republic. We benefit from countless civil rights that aren't found in all countries. We have freedom of conscience, freedom of expression, economic liberties, equal protection under the law, and freedom from cruel and unusual punishments. I will continue to stand by these freedoms which we enjoy through the document I swore to uphold, the Constitution. Thank you again to the Center for Security Policy and to the Team B2 authors for compiling this report and for sharing it with the public. Sincerely, Michelle Bachmann, United States Congress." And Michelle is indeed a precious friend, and I'm going to have the privilege of introducing Pete Hoekstra here just in a moment. He's someone that I consider of the Congressional Human Rights Commission, and I am the founder and co-chair of the International Religious Freedom Caucus. The freedom to worship is a bedrock principle upon which our nation was founded, and to that end I have fought in favor of religious freedom for all religions, including for oppressed Muslims in nations like India, Burma, Pakistan, and Egypt, to name a few. Those are some that I've been personally involved in. Just as we cannot say all Muslims hold a certain view based on the actions of a radical fringe, however, it would be also unwise to discount the malicious intentions of those who wish to subvert American law. Arguments that this is about bigotry are disingenuous and false. We should all remember that upon taking office, as Michelle alluded to, that every member of Congress, according to the U.S. Constitution, swears an oath of office. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I'm about to enter. So help me God. Now, in keeping with that oath, I believe members of Congress have a sworn duty to educate themselves about the threats to our Constitution and to our way of life. And I personally believe the Team B2 report can help members of Congress do just that. Although the content, of course, of the report is obviously applicable to the public servants in the various other government offices who also have a professional and civic duty to defend and protect this country. The creeping influence of Sharia law certainly meets the criteria of a threat to the Constitution, as it overtly threatens to subvert and subordinate American law and the Constitution itself. It is essential that Congress learn of the threat posed by Sharia and familiarize itself with those who promote it within our own borders. This report, drafted and endorsed by some of the most prominent and experienced intelligence experts in the nation, raises countless areas of concern related to national security that the Congress must investigate and address sooner rather than later. Now, it's my privilege to introduce Peter Hoekstra, a member of Congress. He's been here ever since I've been here, and he's been our guy on the Intelligence Committee, and there's no one that I believe has a better handle in the Congress at this point, and it's a disaster, Pete, that you're going on to bigger and better things. But there's no one that has a better understanding of the intelligence issues related to this country than Pete, and I consider him a personal friend and a Valley Forge American and a true friend to American and really human freedom, Pete. So I'll let you take over.
Of our colleagues in the House of Representatives, who I hope will all take the time and the energy not only to read it, but to understand it, to better understand the threat that we face. You know, over the last 21 months, I think, you know, we've seen a lack of clarity on behalf of the leadership in this country as to understanding the threat that we face. It started almost on the first day that the President was sworn in. Almost immediately became clear that this President was going to observe and view the threat that we faced from what we thought was terrorism. He said, well, you know, this is maybe not really a war. This is more of a legal problem. We'll fight this through the courts. So there was a lack of clarity as to whether we are, and I think that lack of clarity has continued over the last 21 months. Are we engaged in a real threat to our national security, or is this really nothing more than a legal problem dealing with bad folks out there, and we can deal with this through the judicial system? We then went through a process where, you know, we had, you know, infamously, and you know, the terminology has now changed, but I think it gives you an insight into exactly who this administration is and how they viewed it. When the Secretary of Homeland Security came out and said, you know, we're not really concerned about terrorism, and actually that's the wrong word. We're looking at man-made disasters. And some of us just kind of, who have been working on this for a number of years, kind of looked at it and said, whoa. You know, exactly where is this administration going in talking about man-made disasters? We've seen a man-made disaster. It's what happened in the Gulf. The events that we had seen since 2001 and actually before that, those are not man-made disasters. Those, from our perspective, are an act of war or terrorism. But to try to describe them and use this some other word again provided a lack of clarity as to exactly where we were and how we were going to face and address these issues. We then saw the President go through a tour of the Middle East, which infamously some of us have come to refer to as an apology tour, and believing that what the consequences that and the attacks that America was facing were perhaps a result of our actions and our activities and our thoughts, and not the responsibility of the people that were attacking us in making those judgments. And then we got into later in 2009 and moving into 2010, where you had the attack at Fort Hood and a refusal to acknowledge that as a terrorist attack and looking at that as a criminal attack. Even the report that recently came out had to really struggle to move and to describe that as something that might be affiliated or associated with radical jihadists or the overall threat that we face in this country. We saw the same thing in regards to the Christmas Day potential attack on our airlines. We see the same thing again on Times Square, a constant refusal by this administration to recognize the threat, to identify the threat, and clearly then develop strategies that will confront, contain, and ultimately defeat this threat. And that's why I think this Team B report is absolutely so critical to debate, because in one place will enable those who have a different opinion, or for those who want to compare one approach to another, they will actually now be able to go and coherently or see a coherent piece of work that argues the other side of the issue, which is exactly what we need. We need to have this debate. You know, I travel around the world, and it appears to me that we are one of the few countries. We've paid perhaps one of the biggest sacrifices But we are one of the countries that refuses to really acknowledge the threat the way that others who are closer to it and experience it on a day-to-day basis identify it. They will identify it as radical Islam. They will identify and use the term as a jihadist movement. And at that point, if you clearly identify the threat, you will be in a better position to confront it and contain it, as long as we don't identify it clearly. And that is what this report does. Frank talked about the earlier Team B, others of us call it red teaming, whatever it is, but having this second opinion. And if you doubt, that say, well, this is done on the outside or whatever, there are a number of examples. Frank gave one where, we were taking a look at the threat from communism. For, I think, 2.5, 3 years, we've been asking for a red team or a Team B approach on Iran. Why? Because I believe that the analysis that's been done through the intelligence community of Iran is fundamentally flawed and wrong. And we need a Team B approach and a different perspective on Iran, so that the American people, from my perspective, can have, okay, here's the official point of view of the government here, and if you can do it with open source information. I'm much more in favor of doing it, allowing a group of experts to have access to all the intelligence that the intelligence community has, and have them do it that way. But if not, we need one on, we'll do one with open sourcing. And that's why this report, because this is another area where I think it is clear that an alternative point of view is needed. The American people need an alternative point of view that they can analyze, and then they can make a decision. And that's why, Frank, I just really appreciate the work that your team has done, the work that they've done, and I hope that this document is widely distributed and widely read, and that it will cause a serious debate among policymakers about the threat that we face, that it will cause a serious discussion about within the American populace about the threat that we face, because it will clearly, that debate will enlighten the types of strategies that we can put in place to confront it, contain it, and defeat it. And I just want to say one other thing, and tread very, very carefully here, but Trent mentioned it. We need to have a full and open discussion about Americans and American values being applied to freedom of religion. We all know about the discussion we've had here in the States and it's a very, very good discussion to have, but it has to be a balanced discussion because the persecution of Christians around the world is growing, and it is not diminishing. And just like people have freedom of religion here in the United States, it is something that we not only should advocate, and not only should the President advocate for freedom of religion in the United States and a respect for all religions throughout the United States of America, but the President and policymakers in America have to push and press for the expansion of those values around the world. And clearly, Shariah is in stark contrast to that. And you can see it in what is happening with the Coptics in Egypt, what is happening to Christians in Lebanon, what is happening to the Christian community in Iraq, and throughout the world. We have a responsibility to promote and articulate that view, not only as a value that is applicable in the United States, but as a value that is applicable around the world. It is an inherent value that we as Americans believe in. So, thank you.
I'd just like, if I may, to present formally a copy of the Team B report to you, Congressman Franks. Thank you. And to you, Congressman Hoekstra. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate enormously the leadership of both of these gentlemen and what it represents here in terms of expertise in the Congress that will be better, we hope, informed and equipped to fight the fight that has to be fought in this body as well as in the public arena at large. I'm going to ask two members of the Team B to make brief remarks at this point to illuminate why we did this study, why it's necessary, and some of the main themes that it represents. We have, as I've mentioned, a number of them, other members present as well. I think the logistics of the room may not facilitate them participating directly, but I'm very grateful to them for being here, as well as for the expertise that they brought to the preparation of this report. It was a 6-month exercise. It entailed myriad drafts and reworkings and improvements, and I think as a result of all of that effort and the tremendous expertise they bring to the topic, from various walks of life, by the way. Some are indeed, as Congressman Hoekstra mentioned, some of the senior and most respected intelligence professionals in our country. Some have other national security credentials. People like our co-chair, General Ed Soyster, actually brings both as a distinguished military officer, a retired lieutenant general in the United States Army, and as a former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Some have approached this from other walks of life as academics, as bloggers, but with deep knowledge of the national security as well as the historical problems that are an integral part of Shariah and what makes it the threat to America that it is today. With that, I'd like to welcome Lieutenant General Ed Soyster to come and make some brief remarks. This is a change in the batting order, as you may have remembered. Come on up, General. General Boykin, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, was supposed to be here. He was called down to Tampa, where he is doing some briefings this morning, and we're delighted that his colleague Ed Soyster could be here in his place. So thank you very much, General, for your leadership. And
thanks, Frank. In fact, you're changing the batting order. How do you like to follow these two congressmen with any remarks? Let me tell you, start off with a confession. That's always a good way to start. My confession is that I'm here out of ignorance. Ignorance in terms of about 3 or 4 years ago, as I'm watching events, long retired, I realized how little I knew about Islam. So, and so well expressed, Congressman, in terms of a duty to learn if you're in office. Well, I was retired, but I still wanted to learn, and so I started to read. I started to run into guys like Steve and John. I went to classes. I went to other classes, and I started to learn. And I found out the more I learned, the worse it got. And so also as a military guy, and you can't speak as a military guy without referring to Sun Tzu, but he said, know your enemy and know yourself, and you can fight 100 battles without disaster. And so I started to think about that, and that was translated then into later, in fact in my era, to intelligence preparation of the battlefield, which required that you not only know the enemy's strength, number of tanks or whatever, but you also had to know the doctrine that you were up against, because that's how he did things. And so I found as I looked at reports that I could find out who did it, when they did it, where they did it, how they did it, etc. But there was never an answer to why this event occurred. And so I began my study under some very good leadership to try to learn. And I also thought then, as Sun Tzu says, you got to know yourself. The reality is, as I looked, and part of our problem and expressed in different ways, our Western civilization sort of got started in terms of its uniqueness with the Enlightenment. And that was a struggle to deny man's metaphysical or religious orientation and rebuild society based on reason and pursuit of empiricism. And then we went back at the time, looked at the Greek philosophers. A guy named Socrates talked about open debates, etc. And I found today a hardening of anti-Socratic mentality, which is opposed to rigorous public discourse about values and matters of ultimate meaning. Academics no longer strive to expose the truth about alternative ideas. Instead, they praise the virtue of all of them. All of this boils down to the world today of our desire for political correctness and exactly how we have to word things and say things. So it's our hope now with this work that we can back up our intellectual pedigree and begin to stimulate public discussion about this threat that we face. And I would close by saying I'm really not a contributor to this work, but rather a great supporter. But in those terms, I would like to thank those who labored so long, so hard, the intellectual approach to this topic, the research that was done, the assurances of footnotes, and then we'd pass it around and get some additional guidance. Never one hesitation, back to work. So I hope that you all find, as I have found in this process of learning, that we have produced a document that will facilitate that and can be the basis for the open discussion that we need to have to determine the course of action that we can take as we better define this significant enemy. Thanks, Frank.
Before introducing our next presenter, let me just, as two of our colleagues were alluded to, let me read the names of all of those in the team who participated. In addition, of course, to General Soyster and General Boykin, Christine Brim, my colleague at the Center for Security Policy, Ambassador Henry Cooper, Stephen Coughlin, one of the mentioned folks, Michael Del Rosso, who's also here, John Guandolo, I think the General also mentioned John, former FBI agent Brian Kennedy of the Claremont Institute in California, Claire Lopez, who was an indispensable help to us in herding the cats and getting this product done, Admiral Ace Lyons, who had hoped to be here but was called to New York today, Andy McCarthy, of whom I'll speak in a moment, Patrick Poole, who's here, Joe Schmitz, former Inspector General of the Defense Department, Tom Trento, in from Florida. I saw Tom here. J. Michael Waller, colleague at the Institute of World Politics in the Center. Diana West, who is here somewhere, as I recall. I think I saw her. Jim Woolsey, who could not be here this morning, and David Yerushalmi, who is here, our General Counsel at the Center. These are absolutely extraordinary human beings. They are, to my way of thinking, truly the best in the business who aren't working for the other side, or at least enabling the other side. And Andy McCarthy is a guy who has, in a number of different capacities, gone up against the other side and done as much as anybody I know to defeat them, certainly individually and in his previous incarnation as a federal prosecutor, assistant U.S. attorney, including putting some of them away for life for having tried to blow up the World Trade Center the first time around. He's gone on to great things. He is now with the National Review Online. He is the author of 2 must-read books on this subject, Willful Blindness and The Grand Jihad. It is a privilege to have him be a critical part of the team. He is the co-author with General Soyster and Jim Woolsey of a very, very useful short course in the Team B exercise that appeared in the commentary pages of the Washington Times today. You might also have seen the front page story in the Washington Times by Bill Gertz about this report. We appreciate both of those important contributions. And Andy, yours. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Let me just emphatically agree with something the General said. I came at this from complete ignorance as well. It was ignorance in 1993 when I think all of us were clueless, frankly, about what it is that we were up against. But I'd suggest that there's a silver lining, at least in the initial stages of ignorance, and that is that back in those days, 1993 and forward, we weren't dealing with 17 years of built-up political correctness that sort of put everybody off from dealing with the reality that was in front of us. And as a result, when we proved the cases in the 1990s and convicted terrorists in civilian court in the 1990s, nobody tried to stop us or suggest in any way that we shouldn't follow the evidence and the facts wherever they led. And as a result, whatever politically correct thing the government may have been saying outside the courtroom, inside the courtroom where it was important, where we were speaking to the jury, we were able to establish for them that the people who were committing terrorist acts and committed to destroying the United States were acting specifically and directly on the basis of an ideology. Since that time, in the 17 years since then, we've built up a narrative that I would suggest to you is a fictional narrative, and that's the whole point of this exercise. And that is that what we are confronted by is a handful, relatively speaking, of aberrational, marginal, fringe characters, and they are the extremists. And everybody else, as long as they're not planning to blow up a bridge this second, is a moderate. And what our argument is here is that that's no way to protect a country. The exercise that we're trying to push forward here, the central thrust of it is that we need to move the dividing line or the focal point of where we understand the threat to the United States, which is about a lot more than terrorism. There are terrorists, but there are also radicals who, though they don't use terrorist methods, want to take the United States exactly to the place where the terrorists want to take the United States. So what we're suggesting is that the dividing line here is not terrorism. The dividing line here is Shariah. Shariah is the Islamic legal and political framework. There are some in the Islamic world who want to take it the way that we take religion in the West. That is, that it's a private matter that isn't imposed as an institutional, legal, political matter on the rest of society. There is a vast swath of the Islamic world that rejects that and takes it as a divine mission to impose Sharia, whether that's done by terrorism or done by more sophisticated means. Sharia is the focal point that we need to look at. And Sharia is extremely important because it is completely antithetical in very core ways to American values, starting with the fundamental premise of the United States, which is that the governed have a right to make law for themselves, to make choices for themselves, irrespective of any religious code. So that's the dividing line. That's where we're trying to push the focal point. And I'm very proud to have been associated with this project and the people who've contributed to it. Thanks very much.
I'd like to just make one quick point, and then we'll open it up to your questions. This study, as Andy said, basically takes as its central proposition that there is a knowable ideological, doctrinal program that has as its objective the supremacy of that program worldwide, and that directs, mandates, obligates its adherents to strive to that end through two means. Where possible, through violence, because it's the most efficient way, and Muhammad's example encourages it, but where that's impracticable, through a more stealthy technique, at least until it's no longer impractical. And my principal takeaway from this report, and I hope it will be something that all of us will be concentrating our minds on, is that if we, through what is, whether intentionally by us or not, convey the idea we are submitting to those who espouse Sharia, we are signaling to them that it is now practicable to revert to the more forceful, more efficient way of achieving their ends. In other words, the same kind of phenomenon that characterized détente in the period of the Team B1 exercise where we were signaling weakness to the Soviet Union, where our efforts to embrace, or at least to accommodate, if not actually to underwrite, the Soviet Union and its enterprises, was emboldening to the Soviets to believe that they should redouble their efforts. So too today, in the era of Team B2, we are confronting, I believe, the distinct danger that engagement, the term today, accommodations, acquiescence, some call it political correctness, I think it really is submission, will simply induce our enemies to make redoubled efforts of their own kind, which will be to impose upon us Shariah through force, through violence. Here we are in the immediate aftermath of the 9th anniversary of 9/11. That could look like a day at the beach if we actually see people who not only embrace this particular program, equip themselves with weapons far more formidable than jet aircraft to inflict massive damage on us. And if, God forbid, it happens, as the President likes to say, whether we like it or not, people who have not connected the dots, people who have communicated submission to our enemies, will be held accountable, I believe, by the American people for having brought on our heads that new, much more dangerous, much more devastating terror. We hope with this product to help prevent that from happening. But the time is short for corrective action. We very much appreciate your attention to these findings, which are broken down in, I think, a page and a half or so. So if you can't bring yourself to read the 170 pages, cut to the chase. The key findings are very easily taken aboard, and we are prayerful that they will inform the debate we must have, starting here, starting now.